Good afternoon. As you may have heard, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee will be joining us momentarily. My name is Dr. Ron Daniels. I'm president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, convener of the National African American Reparations Commission, and facilitator of the HR-40 Strategy Group. The HR-40 Strategy Group is a assembly of reparations advocates, scholars, faith leaders and civil rights, human rights leaders who have come together to educate and organize around HR-40. I'm delighted to say that we have been meeting for 96 weeks in this historic endeavor to get HR-40 across the finish line. This press conference is being convened under the theme HR-40 on the Move, Good for African Americans and Good for America. The objective is really to speak to the President of these United States of America, President Joe Biden, to urge him to create the HR-40 Commission by executive order. As we speak today, there's been an unprecedented surge in interest in reparations, which has been manifested in the largest number of co-sponsors and yes votes ever to support HR-40. An astounding 217 yes votes, a combination of co-sponsors and yes votes, which means if it were to be called for a floor vote, we're one vote shy, and we could get that one vote in order to pass HR-40 in the House of Representatives. That would be a moral victory. However, our quest is not for a moral victory as we reflect on the historic struggle and trials and tribulations and triumphs of our ancestors, but a real victory. So a real victory is elusive as we were to approach the Senate of these United States of America. It therefore would have to be in by executive order. And this is what we are wishing for, hoping for, pushing for in terms of indeed the possibility of President Joe Biden cementing his legacy by way of creating the commission for HR-40, which is to study and make reparations proposals. It is to study and to develop reparations proposals for African Americans. And so we've assembled a strong lineup of advocates and organizers under the leadership of the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee, who has inherited the torch from John Conyers, who is smiling because of the way we are moving forward with this effort. John Conyers first introduced the first bill in 1989. It was a study bill, which was eventually transformed into the bill that we currently have. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has been tireless in her efforts, visionary, courageous, and pounding the pavement and the halls of Congress, getting us to this point. And we were delighted that we have joined her with the HR-40 Strategy Group, and which we will acknowledge later on. And so that is what brings us to this point. We've assembled, again, we'll be hearing shortly from the Honorable Barbara Lee, a longtime friend, who is also advancing a resolution on reconciliation and transformation, which is really a companion and complementary bill to HR-40. We will also be joined by Congressman Jamaal Bowman from the 16th Congressional District in New York, a rising star on the horizon who is energetic, visionary, and bound to make a legislative name for himself, given his roots and his origin. And I have to say that because I'm from New York and he hails from these parts of the woods, so to speak. And then Kamm Howard, who is just recently returned, leading a delegation to meet with the Vatican on the crucial issue of calling the Vatican, the Catholic Church, to task for its historic role in the Transatlantic Slave Trade. A very successful meeting, I must say, that was facilitated through the network lobby that is yielding some very, very positive results. And then we have Ms. Joan Neal, who is Deputy Executive Director of the Network Lobby, an organization that is very effective helped to get the Obamacare across the finish line, as they have been very, very effective at getting educating and organizing. And one of the organizations that indeed has issued a letter to the White House asking for an executive order. And we hope to be joined also by Hillary Shelton, the director of the esteemed NAACP Washington Bureau. Now I say we hope because they're in the middle of their convention. We hope he will be able to break free for a moment in order to address us. I now see that Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has joined us. And so I now can turn the floor over to the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee, who is the lead sponsor on HR-40 and our leader on this initiative. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, you have the floor.
Dr. Ron Daniels, what a pleasure and what a dynamic group who have joined together for truth. That's simply what we're here for, the truth. Thank you for convening this very important virtual press conference that I hope will rage across America. Yes, I use the term rage across America to include the nonviolent rage of action. This is a call to action. Before I came to this press conference, I thought it was potent and important to stand on the floor of the House and call for the passage of an executive order, the implementation of HR-40. I captured the 5th and the 14th Amendment and the 9th Amendment, specifically the 9th, the 14th Amendment of our actions that were taken this week to protect privacy, equal protection of the law. And I followed it with saying, then HR-40 is a provision that will provide additional constitutional protection for those who did not receive the dignity of status of one human being or citizenship, and did not receive the dignity of compensation for work, life insurance, workman's comp, family dignity for 246 years and beyond. HR-40 is reparative, restorative, but it is the right thing to do. It is the overcomer of the hugely uninformed discussion on the critical race theory. Some would ask, why did I work so hard to get Juneteenth as a federal holiday? Why did I introduce it as the first member of Congress to push this holiday? It is because it was about freedom that causes the nation in a federal holiday to stop for a moment to tell the story of slavery. HR-40, with the commission of scholars, academicians, medical professionals, will be able to move America forward in a corrective action. Are we aware that this element is HR-40 to do several things in terms of the concept of reparations? And that is the formal acknowledgement of a historical wrong, the recognition that there is a continuing injury, the commitment to redress by the federal government, which sanctioned the enslavement and subsequent discrimination, and the actual compensation, whatever form or forms that are signed upon. Excuse me. John Conyers introduced this legislation in 1989 after the American Civil Liberties Act that we enthusiastically supported for the Japanese American community, signed by a Republican president, that provide actual compensation for those that were interned in World War II. The Japanese Americans have joined us with all enthusiasm, along with 350 plus and growing organizations, including, of course, our friends at National Action Network, the Urban League, which is holding their convention, the NAACP, and the Congressional Black Caucus, and many other organizations, Color of Change, the ACLU, the Human Rights Watch, have all been, along with the Episcopal Church and many different denominations that have been with us on this question. So what I speak of today is the drive toward completion of our task. This is going to be the call to action for the nation. We have worked faithfully for more than 3 years almost to methodically put the building blocks together around the idea of the rightness of this question of the commission to study reparations. It is interesting that we can do this without any pain, because the numbers regarding African Americans are so crucial that there is nothing else to do but to pass out to promote this commission. Out of the 49.4 million students in public school, 7.4 million students were Black students. About 7% of them were in public schools. Public schools identified them. Black students face greater rates of suspension, expulsion, and arrest than their white classmates. Black students accounted for 15% of the student body in the 2016 school year, but 31% of arrest. Black students are also more likely to be subjected to social and media surveillance. Post-secondary education, we're 12% of the student population, but nearly 2.5 million were enrolled in degree granting post-secondary only. Nearly 2.5 million were enrolled in degree granting post-secondary institutions. And in that does not meet the enrollment or the population of our community. Student loan debt, Black and African-American college students owe an average of $25,000 more in student loan debt than our white students. That's only in education alone. Healthcare at a glance, the death rate for African-Americans, African-American ages 18 to 49 are 2 times more likely to die from heart disease than whites. Just a brief summary. Cancer, Black women are 41% more likely to die from breast cancer. Diabetes is an issue that plagues us. Black maternal mortality. I won't go on, but what I'm saying is we need say no more. We don't do this in anger. We do this in a call to action. It is a necessity. It is an imperative. I will not take a decade more to pass and put into place HR-40. A decade plus for Juneteenth, federal holiday, first in 38 years, to get the world to open up about slavery, but not a decade more after already 30 plus years since 1989. I finished by holding this book. If you go through the Bill of Rights, in each and every one, you will find that the nation needs to improve its relationship to the descendants of enslaved Africans. Whether it is the First Amendment, freedom of speech and religion, whether it is the Fifth Amendment, which applies to due process, whether it's the equal protection of the law, whether it's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, ending slavery, 14th Amendment, equal protection, and 15th Amendment, the right to vote, and many others. We are lacking in the African-American community right out of the Constitution. Passed HR-40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals. I do want to honor my colleagues, Congressman Bowman, for the outstanding leadership he's given as an educator and his most strong voice dealing with the legacy and the days of African-American men and others. Let me thank Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who is a member of leadership, an important member of leadership, who has never stopped helping the most vulnerable and has raised up the issue of reconciliation under HR-40 19 and has spoken before the United Nations on the question of HR-40 19 and reconciliation, restoration, and proudly HR-40, the Commission to Study Slavery and Develop Reparation Proposals, which, by the way, I was able to secure the support of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe on the issue of reparations as we concluded our conference, as well as to recognize that an African-American woman is being held in Russia, and we concluded to bring Brittany Griner home. With that, Mr. Chairman and Convener, I yield to Congresswoman Lee. Are you on?
Yeah,
Yes.
Congresswoman Lee is on and has to go rapidly, so we
All
want to get her in right away.
I yield, and Congressman Bowman, you are coming up afterwards. I am looking forward to thank you for your strength. And Congresswoman Barbara Lee, I yield to you for your strength. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, for your strength and for being such a warrior woman. You know, just very quickly, and I won't be long, but I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I worked for the great Congressman Ron Dellums for many, many years. And Ron worked very closely with Congressman Conyers on HR-40. In fact, for a while, there were probably just, I think, from what I remember, two sponsors, Congressman Conyers and Dellums. And when I came to Congress in '98, that was one of the first bills that I talked to Congressman Conyers about, because I understand the context and I understand the urgency of it. And Congresswoman Jackson Lee, I just have to tell you, I really admire and honor you for staying the course, because this is some tough work. But it's going to get done because it's righteous work, and this is the work to repair the damage of over 250 years of enslaving our ancestors. And thank you for the national holiday, June 19th. My great grandmother was born in Galveston, enslaved. My grandfather was born in 1875. This has been a big issue for me personally and for my family. And so, Dr. Daniels, let me thank you and the Reparations Commission and everyone working to finally make HR-40 a reality. We would not be here today without you and your leadership and continuing to beat this drum and organizing. A couple of things I want to say about where we are and why this administration, the Biden administration, and I've talked to them numerous times, I am saying to everyone, the time is past due for an executive order. You see through the co-sponsorship of HR-40 in the Congress, which Congresswoman Jackson Lee has worked so hard to achieve, you see the public is with us. First of all, it is a politically reasonable policy for an executive order when you have an administration that has equity and justice as central to its policies and everything they do, very publicly have stated. The president has stated domestic terrorism against Black people is rooted as the poison of white supremacy. If you didn't believe that before January 6th, I'm confident now the country understands this. Whether they want to agree or not is one thing. But with the president's leadership and the establishment of this commission, I am confident that the educational process begins. And in fact, related to January 6th and related to white supremacy, the time is now. We can't let this just wither and not allow the administration not to take this up as an executive order. It's very important also to recognize that this is about repairing the damage, as Congresswoman Jackson Lee just laid out, just a fraction of what the damage has been. Countries all around the world have used reparations as a vehicle to repair the damage. And I'm shocked when I talk to my members of Congress. Some of them say, well, can't you take out reparations, the ones who don't quite understand this? I said, well, wait a minute. The Japanese American community supports us because they understand and the name and the title and the coining and why reparations. This is a universal term. Why would we not, as it relates to African Americans, use the term reparations? And so when I talked to my colleagues about that, they said, oh yeah, I guess you're right. We were fine then, we should be okay now. And so I'm sharing this because it's so important that this public awareness continue, and that the public embracing the clarity of the African American struggle. And the next front, or this front of the civil rights movement, is the movement for reparations. That's natural. Again, reparations all around the world has been a standard mechanism and process for repairing the damage of crimes against humanity, which is what enslaving Africans for over 250 years means. And then you had, of course, systemic racism and the Black codes and all of the legal basis for the continuation of enslaving people of African descent through more sinister and more I would say closet kind of ways, instead of being upfront. And you know what happened during the civil rights movement, the desegregation laws. I mean, all of these laws and policies have been in place in a way to continue to subjugate African Americans. And so the only way out of this, and the only way that we can repair this, have a country that lives up to its creed of liberty and justice for all, is through HR-40 and reparations. So I'm calling on, once again, the Biden administration to issue an executive order, because not only is it good for African Americans, as we saw on January 6th, this is good for the country. America needs to have an executive order that embodies the goals of HR-40, because this will be the asset, this will be the legacy of the Biden administration as it relates to African Americans. And Lord knows we need this, because this administration is committed to equity and racial justice. And I truly believe that the framework upon which this must be presented through the White House should be through an executive order of HR-40. So thank you again, Congresswoman Jackson Lee and Dr. Daniels. I'm sorry I have to run, but I just wanted to step in and just say a few words, because California, of course, you know, has led as, I think, one of the first states to establish a task force on reparations. And we're developing reparations, and it's been a very interesting and public process where the public now is being more informed about the injustices that have taken place in this country since its founding. So thank you all again very much for this, and I appreciate being able to be with you a few minutes.
Powerful. We are so grateful to you, Congresswoman Lee, for your continuous staying, if I might say, on the battlefield of justice. You have lightened us with your inspirational charge, and we thank you for that. And we thank you for tying it to January 6th, because we know from testimony that there were any number of racial moments that came up during January 6th, and we should not run away from it. As I introduce, and I thank you so very much again, and we recognize your schedule, but we're grateful, and we will ensure in our question and answer period to remind everyone of your powerful presentation. As I bring forward my congressman, as I call him, from the great state of New York, I want to be reminded, or want you all to be reminded of the fact that the tragedy in Buffalo was a terrorist, a racist with a gun who believed in the replacement theory. And that is that African Americans in particular, and people of color, were attempting to replace others, in this instance, white people. How does that bring us together? I believe HR-40 will bring us together because truth lightens your burden. Truth embraces everyone. And I'm very grateful that Congressman Bowman is an educator, and all he could do with his children, the pupils, the students, is to tell them the truth. Congressman Bowman, thank you so very much for your service.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Jackson Lee, for your continued fight and for leading this effort on HR-40. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this press conference and allowing me to say a few words. I'm really proud to join everyone here today in our push to get President Biden to create a commission to study and develop reparations for African American people through executive order and authority. Reparations have been a critical issue for me and my district for so many reasons, and I just want to go into a few. First and foremost, we have to acknowledge that trauma is intergenerational. It's historical. It literally lives in the body and in our DNA as African Americans. It is compounded. For as long as we don't address it, it will continue to compound. Reparations are not just about slavery. It's about the repeated trauma that began with chattel slavery, even before that, through the kidnapping and shipping of us off of our homeland. But it continues through today. People right now that look like me, my wife and kids, my students, my constituents, are experiencing the trauma from just a few generations ago. We cannot ignore that. Slavery, Jim Crow, housing discrimination, redlining, the war on drugs, underfunded schools, mass incarceration have all compounded with one another to crush Black communities across the country. And many of these were policy decisions that have led to policy violence by design. This is what it is when we talk about de facto and de jure racism that continues. This is why we see a host of outcomes, from life expectancy to wealth, depressed for Black communities. The effects of slavery are wide-reaching, and we can't understand their breadth or width without first committing resources to studying it. The HR Commission would help us to do just that and finally tell the truth about who we are in our history. Our biases, which are the result of the African-American story being told in our country with an origin as slaves, infects every aspect of our public and private lives. In our public schools, we minimize the impact of slavery. At this point, we are all too familiar with the discussions around critical race theory. At our workplaces, we value Black perspectives less. In our media, we reinforce stereotypes that historically do not favor Black people. Black homeowners' homes are appraised at a lesser value than their white counterparts. The Black pay and wealth gap show few signs of improvement. Black students are criminalized at a young age. Going further, the median wealth of Black households is $24,100, while the median wealth of white households is $189,100. And the Black-white pay gap is as wide now as it was in 1950. We need to quantify the impact of de facto racism, the racism that was written into our laws, and de jure racism, the racism that's not on our books, but the result of social biases that I would argue is living and breathing in America's atmosphere. When the New Deal was enacted by Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Federal Housing Authority was born, and from the FHA came redlining and the explicit policy to deny home loans to people living in Black neighborhoods. The Homestead Act of 1862 granted over 270 million acres of land to over 1.5 million white families between 1868 and 1934. Land which turned into a base of capital to build into wealth. We need to truly understand these impacts in numbers, facts, and figures. Committees for truth and reconciliation are commonplace in other countries who have carried out targeted and systemic oppression. Over 40 countries have established commissions for truth and reconciliation over the past 3 decades, including South Africa, Korea, Rwanda, and Canada. Before that, Germany held the Nuremberg trials and amended their very constitution to atone for the wrongs of the Holocaust. America's legacy of slavery is still ongoing, and part of the reason it persists is because we have never faced it as a country and settled on ways to address it. We need this commission, but we also need to foster a national discussion on American racism in our schools, in our workplaces, and in every segregated pocket of our country that has never had such a conversation. In addition, we must establish a national curriculum that provides an honest recounting of our history and passes on the truths of American racism without whitewashing or minimizing. My bill, the African American History Act, would get us started towards telling that truth. Overall, we need to create an itemized accounting of the harm done by our government at both the local and federal level, and the policies that exacerbated that harm against Black people. And we need a commission to study reparations. This is long overdue. Thank you once again, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, for continuing the fight and for your leadership. And we need this to become a national movement. But the president can start with an executive order to form a commission to study reparations. Thank you so much.
We're grateful to you, Congressman, and I can assure you that your outstanding legislation would have a space and a place in a commission that when we look at slavery, it is the continuing and the continuum of where it has gone from the time that it is alleged historically to have started, though the dates vary, to this very moment in 2022. And you're absolutely right about the moment to pause to study African-American history in a form and in a manner in terms of the curriculum that allows us to not run away from racism and racist acts and tendencies, but to find a way to embrace, because I believe that children can be and find a common space of humanity, and let them lead as we go forward, because they are curious about each other. And I believe that the commission will also set a tone and can set a tone of healing, which has never been done. And so we pass each other on the street, different races, and in particular, Black and white, and we do not understand each other, or there is no effort to do so. There have been moments after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, and they were fleeting. We have to once and for all understand that we will never move forward unless we adhere to your words, your legislation, and your commitment to HR-40 for the purpose of its restoration, reconciliation, but study and understanding. Thank you so very much. Dr. Daniels, are you introducing the
Yes,
Kamm Howard? And we will yield back to you. I see him ready to start out now. Thank you so very much. And thank you, Congressman.
Yes, we
If
now
you can stay for questions, we'd appreciate it, Congressman. I think we're going to questions soon after Mr. Howard, possibly.
Well, we have two more. We have two more speakers.
All right, thank you.
We now go to Kamm Howard. Again, as I indicated earlier, is just back from leading a milestone delegation to the Vatican. He is also the director of Reparations United. We yield to Kamm Howard.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels, and thank you, Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee, for your magnanimous leadership on this very important issue on reparations, an historical issue that began hundreds of years ago and has continued to this day, and is being led powerfully by you. And I want to thank Congresswoman Barbara Lee for her outstanding support of this effort, and Congressman Bowman as a new voice and a new strong voice in support of this historical effort. This is an unprecedented opportunity for the sitting president of the United States to begin the process of significantly changing this country in a substantial and just manner for all Americans. No honest person can deny that Black Americans, unlike any other group in this country, has given so much benefit to this nation, economically, through our ancestral enslaved labor, culturally, through our many creative contributions that have given America dominance, and politically, in our strong fights for justice that has given women and other subgroups protections of their civil rights and access to power in America. No honest person can neither deny the intense vitriol hatred and accompanying dehumanizing treatment that we have received at the hands of all branches and levels of the US government, at the hands of the most sacred institutions in this country, and at the hands of a sizable chunk of the leading and lasting corporate entities that define America's greatness. No segment of America carries this dual existence in America than African Americans, always giving and yet continuously on the receiving end of the worst of this nation. That which this nation has given us has us, in the words of Tom Burrell, on the bottom of every good list in America and on the top of every bad list. With the political will that exists in this president's party, over 217 pledged votes in the House, leading Senate committee members in alignment, the vice president fully in support. A Huffington Post poll showing 70% of Democratic voters favor HR-40. That was in 2019, and we're certain that number has increased. And a recent Democratic National Committee resolution urging the passage of HR-40. The time to act, Mr. President, on behalf of HR-40 is now. HR-40, through executive order, will place you, Mr. President, as someone who took advantage of this historical context and acted in a way that steered this nation on a true trajectory of peace and prosperity for all. Finally, in a recent trip on Monday to the Vatican on this very issue of reparations, officials there indicated that Pope Francis is definitely committed to racial justice and reconciliation and are collaborating with us to move the reparations discussions forward within the Roman Catholic Church. Again, this time to act, the time for America to lead, Mr. President, is now. History will not be forgiving if you miss this opportunity. HR-40 for executive now. I am Kamm Howard, Reparations United. Thank you for an opportunity to speak on this issue.
Thank you very much, Kamm, for your leadership on this issue. We now want to go to our final speaker.
Powerful.
Ms. Joan Neal is Deputy Executive Director of the Network Lobby. And I acknowledged earlier that they have sent a letter to the White House requesting an executive order. I also, again, reiterate that Human Rights Watch has done likewise, as well as the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Ms. Joan Neal, thank you again for being with us, and you now have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels and Congresswoman Jackson Lee and others, everyone who has spoken today. I'm so grateful to be with all of you again this afternoon to talk about the urgency of enacting HR-40 and the importance of President Biden creating the HR-40 Commission by executive order. I mean, we've talked about this. Everyone knows the history of slavery in this country, even if they don't want to admit it. But to ignore our country's sin and shameful history, to pretend that it didn't exist or that it is no longer relevant to modern life, is to be in complete denial. While it has been over 400 years since chattel slavery existed in this country, the ideology of white supremacy has not only persisted, but has found ways to morph the legacy of slavery into second-class citizenship. As a country, as a people, we cannot move beyond this original sin, this evil, and until and unless the country tells the truth about our history and takes responsibility for the wrong it has done to a group of its own citizens. The question of reparations has been on the table in this country for a while now. It is time to confess, to repent, and repair. 400+ years of racist policies, laws, and practices have deprived African Americans of equal access to participation in the cultural, political, social, and economic life of our country. This harmful legacy and the enduring racial wealth gap must no longer be allowed to deny Black people access to good health care, to good education, to affordable housing, good jobs paying fair wages, to free and fair exercise of voting rights, and to equal economic outcomes. This unequal treatment has created the unequal society that we have today. And we need a national reparations program that achieves a meaningful closing of these gaps, especially the wealth gap between Black and white Americans, a gap that now is estimated to be $11 trillion. Closing this gap alone, it won't be easy, but it will benefit not only African Americans, but also be good for the economy in general. And that is why this legislation, HR-40, is critically needed now. It takes the first step at the federal level toward reparatory justice for African Americans and descendants of slaves. Because if Black lives truly matter, then HR-40 matters. Now is the time. There is historic support and momentum in this country, and as you said earlier, around the world, but also in the United States Congress right now, thanks to the efforts of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and others in the House, and to the senators who support the companion bill in the Senate. Congress has an opportunity to do the right thing and to make history by passing this bill. But if we cannot get legislation passed, then President Biden must act. He must sign an executive order creating an HR-40 Reparations Commission. You know, if you recall, the Biden-Harris administration promised in their document, Lift Every Voice, the Biden Plan for Black America, to tackle systemic racism and the continuing impact of slavery by supporting a study of reparations. So by signing this executive order, President Biden can help us find the soul of our nation, as he is so fond of speaking about. History will record his courageous action. The voters who put him in office in 2020 will support him, and the country will take a giant step forward in building a new society, one that is finally worthy of the ideals of democracy. And that is why we at Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice and our members around the country urge you, Mr. President, to take action now. Sign an executive order for reparations. Thank you, Dr. Daniels.
Well, thank you very kindly. Good for African Americans and good for America. Hillary Shelton is not with us. We just want to acknowledge him. He's at the NAACP annual convention, no doubt could not break away, but we know the force and power of America's largest and boldest and baddest civil rights organization that is very much in favor of this historic effort. We now want to go to our audience for reactions from the press. Don Rojas is going to direct us to inquiries or questions from the press at this point, and only representatives of the press. It's not an open forum, it is for the press. So Don, you have the floor to steer us.
Yes, Dr. Daniels, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A section of this press conference. I'll begin with a question from Hazel Edney. She's actually got 3 questions there, but let's do the first one. And
let's identify Hazel Edney as the director of the Hazel Trice Edney Wire Service.
Yes, based in Washington, D.C. Her question is specifically, what are you asking for in terms of reparations, and how will it benefit each descendant of slaves?
Let me start by saying that's the beauty of HR-40, the Commission to Study Slavery and Develop Reparations Proposals and Restoration. We know that there has to be a repair. There is a myriad of issues that you've heard these individual speakers speak about. The gamut goes from education to wealth, to healthcare, to housing, to the environment, to climate change, to the criminal justice system. We want a complete look at the ways to systemically change the status of African Americans, descendants of enslaved Africans in this country. It would be presumptuous of us to presuppose the final work of the commission. The legislation is written that there will be hearings across the nation. You will be involved, and those hearings will be before what we hope will be a comprehensive commission that will have on it experts in healthcare, economics, criminal justice system, academia, to be able to ascertain not a book that collects dust, but a roadmap for administrations to come. This doesn't end with the present administration. This is not a Republican or Democratic issue. This is an issue that the nation has to address. And that's what we'd expect a commission to do.
Yes, Ms. Edney has a follow-up question, and it's, are you also intending to press corporations and educational institutions such as Harvard University for reparations to benefit Black students and alums?
I'm just going to briefly answer that because the legislation is governmental. It deals with the federal government and the progeny of such, so that it would impact the nation, states, if we had our final plan as to how those systemic changes would be. Let me take note of the fact, and I know the author of the question knows, it has been a ripple effect throughout the Ivy League schools, Georgetown, I think American University, Yale University, and others begin to understand, Rice University, that reparations is quite warranted, in as much as many of these institutions' initial wealth were from slave owners, or initial wealth, even in some instances, were because they sold slaves to get monies for either their beginning or their ongoing operations. So that once, if the hand of government begins to speak, then you can be assured there will be entities across the nation, corporate entities, that will be moved by this. Their constituents, their employees, will begin to compel them to be moved by this. This will have a positive ripple effect. But the commission itself is established governmentally. It is to assess the government's involvement, the nation's involvement, and as it does so, it will be able to hear from people around the nation And we may hear from leaders or students or alums or corporate board members of universities and corporate America.
Well, let's have others join in the conversation. Well, I happen to know that the National African American Reparations Commission, Reparations United, and others are on this question as well. So we will invite Kamm Howard, Congressman Bowman, and or Ms. Joan Neal to also make a brief response.
So I would echo that by the Congresswoman. The bill, in part of its study, has examined the degree of harm and those who have harmed us in the context of stripping us from our human rights and committing crimes against our humanity. And in that study, certainly the corporate and institutional entities will also have to be examined. But as the Congresswoman stated, this looks at what the government can do in regards to even appealing to those entities for redress methods. So again, the commission, it will be, that would be something that the commission would take up, and we would expect, and we would urge them to do so in a strong and powerful way.
Congressman Bowman.
Yeah, I would just echo what's already been said. We don't want to get in front of the commission. The commission needs to be formed. The commission needs to do its due diligence and study, and then the results will be shared and determinations will be made in terms of which direction to go regarding, what reparations might look like. But first things first, we have to form a commission and let the commission do its job.
Ms. Neal, any response on your part?
I would underscore everything that everyone has already said, and just to simply say that, there have been precedents for commissions like this around the world, Rwanda, South Africa, so this is not something new, but it is something to hold ourselves accountable to, and the federal government needs to start that process.
Dr. Rojas, next question.
We have a question from Mr. Herb Boyd from the New York Amsterdam News. And Mr. Boyd asks, to what degree have the efforts in California and Evanston, Illinois, and elsewhere been effective?
So they've been tremendously effective in assisting us in getting federal co-sponsorship. Each time something happens in the news around local reparations, we were able to use that as we went to congresspersons and senators around the country to get them to sign on to this legislation and support the legislation. So we've always held that everything that happens on the local level works its way up to the federal level. And so we look all of those efforts as positive contributions to our work to move the president forward with an executive order on HR-40.
Well, Kamm is right. I want to yield to Congressman Bowman, but I just want to say that the state of California took exactly our commission, our HR-40. That is what they have done. Now, the implementation is different, and we're watching the implementation as it is proceeding. They're obviously using Californians and interpreting their next steps, and we're watching their next steps. But the idea of the legislative aspect and the ability to get the language and to move it forward through the legislative system and getting the governor to sign it, they signed HR-40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals, and it is now at a state level. As relates to Illinois, we're so grateful to Councilmember Ruth Simmons, but she said that HR-40 inspired her when it came out of the House Judiciary Committee for the first time in the history of the introduction of the bill. We had never been able to pass it, and we had 2 hearings, never been able to have 2 hearings. That inspired her so much, and all of us remember it was a teeming room, it was an overspill, we couldn't get everybody in, and she viewed that in essence as law. But the main point that I think is important about Evanston, Illinois, is that she was able to create a local roadmap for HR-40. Obviously, when you birth something, there will be the yays and the nays, but the yays were so overpowering that she was able to give us a laboratory, a bird's eye view of how unhurtful it is and how helpful it is, and how the community came together. We'll watch it as it goes forward, but that is a prime example of going ahead and using the bill and knowing that, Congressman, it won't hurt us. No one was injured by this very positive effort of repairing the damage, specifically in the African-American community in Evanston, Illinois. Congressman, I don't know if you want to give us a general overview.
Yeah, I would just briefly add, California and Illinois have shown tremendous leadership. I would love to see that happen in every state and every municipality across the country. I know there was a question about private industry, and this bill doesn't call for jurisdiction over that, but to the Congresswoman's point, the seeds of the greatest economy in the history of the world were planted on the backs of Black people via chattel slavery. That is crystal clear. So there needs to be a federal, obviously, commission and investigation, but it needs to happen in every state at every level. And it's great to see certain states and municipalities already showing leadership in these areas.
Let me just quickly add, as a kind of overview, that there are states that are following the lead of California. New York the New York State Assembly has a bill that it follows the same cycle. It is modeled after HR-40, passed the lower house on 2 occasions. The roadblock is in the upper house, trying to get it through. And the Congresswoman is aware too that New Jersey has a reparations commission. They're pushing for a reparations commission. And she referenced earlier, I think it was someone referenced earlier, the desire to take the word reparations out. And in New Jersey, they're saying, say the name, say the word reparations, because they want to make sure that there is a reparations commission. The final thing I would say is there are literally hundreds of cities now, hundreds, who are following the example of Evanston, Illinois. We are actually putting together a resource center there to help guide and build that together. But it is a very, very, very robust movement. Don Rojas, next question from whomever is in the press.
First of all, let me just say that Congressman Bowman has left us. He has a very tight timeline.
Thank you. We want to thank him very much for his great advocacy, support, and his own commitment and investment in improving the lives of our children through his legislative work.
We're waiting for other journalists to either post their questions in the Q&A or raise their hands if they would like to ask a question.
We'll pause for a minute or so, and if not, we will yield to the Congresswoman for a concluding statement.
Thank you.
Any additional questions?
I don't see any as yet, Dr. Daniels.
So we will move on.
Yes.
Dr. Daniels, we're at our time.
Yes. Congresswoman, you have the floor for the concluding statement.
Well, first of all, I think this should be one of many that we gather even different advocates of HR-40 around the nation and have a virtual with representatives from different states who are strong advocates of HR-40, because this is enlightening, and I thank the press very much for their presence here today. We certainly know that you all have a wide spread, and we look forward to hopefully you having captured the importance of this message today. But as I started out, I said, this is a call to action. This is seen around the world as an acceptable response to injury. That is all we're speaking of. Reparations and repair is an acceptable international legal concept that is used by nations large and small. It has been indicated that it was used by Germany. It's indicated it was used by Rwanda. It is well respected in the United Nations. It was accepted in the most recent Organization of Security and Cooperation for Europe, understanding that when we dealt with the questions of equity and dealing with nations, that reparations should be one of the elements that we look at when we assess nations for repairing or assessing the condition of a nation, i.e. The question of what happens in the war in Ukraine and Russia, what happens in some of the tragedies such as Yemen, These are topics and catastrophes that may require this kind of approach. In actuality, one could almost look at the Marshall Plan after World War II, but people just don't want to match reality together. And it appears because race is involved that this is some unusual, far-reaching, far-stretching concept. It is not. It is real. It is used. And if we take the Constitution, as I said, and match the journey of African Americans, the Constitution and Bill of Rights in many instances has failed us because it is not applied. We were the fodder for the hanging fruit. 4,000 of us, and maybe more, unknown and unnamed, from the 1800s into the 20th century, were hung. The continuing issue of race, so much so that in 2022, we're discussing critical race theory. How is that possible? And it has been misused and abused because everyone knows critical race theory is graduate discussion of how race permeates our legal system. But yet it has been burdening poor elementary school teachers trying to teach Johnny and Mary and Kwame and Latifah about the history of this nation. How absurd is that? So I want to just conclude by saying you've heard a powerful recognition of how this can be done, powerful recognition that it's long overdue. You've heard the journey, historical journey that Congresswoman Lee gave us, and she knows, having been here for such a long period of time as a staffer, and now in her position of leadership, and she has been a champion. And so we're certainly grateful to Joan for the religious connection and the whole issue, I believe, of the Good Samaritan. We are blessed by the support of the Episcopal Church, Bishop Curry, who I hope we will embrace and have involved in some future efforts. But if I can conclude, my conclusion is, this is a call to action. As I said, I spoke on the floor of the House before I came, and as I was leaving the floor, a member of leadership said, we want to talk. That's what we have to do. Keep the engine and the fire going so that we can assure everyone that we'll not give up, not give in, and not give out, as the late John Lewis, who was an avid supporter of HR-40 in his lifetime. And I think that's important to be reminded of those elders, John Conyers, John Lewis, who were steadfast in their support for HR-40. We can do no less. I want to conclude by saying unity is our strongest suit. Unity is our strongest suit. There will be moments that it looks like a lull, but it is not. And my challenge is that you don't have to hear from Washington every day. You in your respective jurisdiction can do your own call to HR-40, call to action for HR-40. You can do your own press conference. You can do your own roundtable. We're happy to advise and provide insight. The convener, Dr. Daniels, has his hand at the pulse and every resource. And if he gets a call, he's going to be able to provide you with the resources to do your own roundtable, to do your own press conference, all pushing toward Washington and the administration to ensure that they get moving on a simple but provocative and powerful concept and action, is to create in this country equality for sure in the world, because the world watches America. And I can tell you, as the world looks and sees us standing up a reparations commission, the world will smile. The world will say, America leads again in this 300 million plus nation. They are accepting that they too must be part of reparations and restoration and reconciliation. It makes us equal in the eyes of those who we are always countering and criticizing for their human rights or lack thereof. They will be able to say that they stand on solid ground because they've turned inward and will speak eloquently and act eloquently on human rights and the action that it takes to clean our slate. And so I thank all of you for participating, Dr. Daniels and both Kamm, who just are probably facing jet lag, but have been perky and wonderful today. And of course, Joan, thank you so very much. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, Congressman Jamaal Bowman, thank you. And if I might wish the President of the United States, our friend, a speedy recovery for his recent COVID diagnosis. So we also wish the Vice President well. All of them know the vitality of HR-40, and we look forward to working with them soon, immediately, and swiftly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, again for your leadership. And let me quickly just make some acknowledgments, as I promised to do. We want to thank those press representatives who did appear, and all of our speakers for taking time out of their very busy schedules. I did want to quickly just acknowledge the organizations that are affiliated with the HR-40 Strategy Group. As I promised to do, ACLU, Beatrice and Associates, Black Ad Council, Color of Change, Human Rights Watch, American Civil Liberties Union, Institute of the Black World 21st Century, Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, Make It Plain, Movement for Black Lives, National Action Network, the NAACP. Hillary Shelton could not be here, but he's on board. In COBRA, National Council of Churches, National Council of Negro Women, National Urban League, Network Lobby, Presbyterian Church USA, Reparations Education Project, Reparations United, the Lawyers Committee, and the Who We Are Project, a formidable coalition of people who have been working under the guidance and leadership of the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee. So that concludes this press conference. The Congresswoman has charged us will continue to do others, and we will see you in our next endeavor. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.